If you could wave a magic wand, what one thing would you create or change immediately to help more children find consistent, calm, and resilient health?
Mom guilt.
That's interesting.
I would wipe it off the face of the planet.
I love that one.
I know it's maybe not what you were expecting, but it's so unhelpful and it is our default. And I fall into it as well. I'm by no means perfect. But in order to raise resilient kids, we have to improve our own resilience and our own confidence and connect with our own intuition.
Welcome to the Earth Food First podcast, where we're reimagining kid food culture to protect our children's whole health. And that means body, mood, and mind. In our first guest series, we're talking with moms who have not only made the choice to feed their families differently than the standard kid food culture dictates, but have also built careers helping other parents do the very same. Today's guest is Jess Sherman, an entrepreneur, mom of 3 incredible boys, and basically an absolute superwoman when it comes to helping children calm down, stabilize moodiness, learn to sleep better, learn better, poop better, and be less anxious. That's a lot under one roof. So how does she do it? Well, as a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, award-winning registered holistic nutritionist, international speaker, and author, Jess has successfully connected the dots to show how genetics, nutrition, and hidden biological stress can greatly affect how a child behaves, functions, and thinks. Through her unique coaching program, Jess has helped parents in over 44 countries find effective, safe, and natural solutions to help their kids struggling with anxiety, moodiness, poor sleep, ADHD, autism, and other mood disorders reclaim their resilience and feel awesome, all without medication whenever possible. She's also a certified teacher with a master's degree in education from the University of Toronto. Jess, hello and welcome to the Earth Food First podcast. Thank you so much for participating in our launch series, and it's such an honor to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much.
I was driving in my car and listening to your free 1-hour masterclass last week, and my mind was just truly blown by the information that you were sharing in regards to some of the true causes of children's anxiety, behavioral struggles that just so few parents are aware of or talking about. And I'm just very excited to share your knowledge with the community today. At the top of our show, we like to just provide listeners with a dollop of value right away before we dive in. So the question that I'm going to ask you is, what would you gift our audience? What one takeaway would you share?
I think it's a concept. The concept is that kids are not manipulative. Kids are reactive and they are reflective. And they're very intelligent and they have very intelligent bodies. So whatever we're seeing on the outside is reflective of something on the inside. So it's a concept shift for parents that I would leave them with to chew on.
That's a very good dollop of value right away. And I think I have a 4-year-old. And as you learn how to be a parent, I know your kids, I think, are older, right? How old are they?
They're 12, 14, and 16.
Okay. So I have been so, definitely guilty of just assuming they're like an adult, where adults sometimes are manipulative. And hearing you and other kind of experts, parenting experts that I listen to, talk about how that's not the case at all, it does completely reframe, I think, how we realize we need to interact with them. So yeah,
well,
I am.
And maybe I should clarify, because kids do manipulate, right? They do
Right.
manipulate situations, but they do it out of a sense of necessity and out of a sense of survival. So when I use the word manipulative, it's like they're not connivingly manipulative, but they are
Right.
trying to get what they aren't, what they want and what they
Mhm.
need. But it's reflective of something. It's reflective of they don't have what they need. They don't, there, something is going on with them. They need more
Mhm.
of something or less of something. And they're acting in reaction to that. So our
Right.
job is, rather than, shaming them for being manipulative and conniving, it's to figure out what they need more of and what they need less of so we can create an environment for them.
Right. And that's, I think, where you come in for so many families. So, you're a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, an award winning registered holistic nutritionist. I think when people hear the word nutritionist, they often just assume you are helping people eat healthier foods. But I know now that your work goes so far beyond that. Can you um, dive deeper into your approach that you describe as parenting from the inside out? What does that mean exactly?
The nutrition aspect of it was my entry point. Holistic nutrition really started to show me how food interacts with the body. And so in learning that, we had to learn about all of the body systems and how the body systems work and how we could support body systems with nutrition and with food as a really important aspect. And that sort of opened the window for me to understanding a child's body. I mean, I went into it already interested in children because I was coming from a career as a teacher. So I knew I wanted to work with children. And so I wanted to understand kids' bodies better. And that was my inroad to that. And then functional diagnostic nutrition took it one step deeper to be able to run some functional lab testing and see what's actually happening in there. So we can make some guesses just from what we're seeing around nutrition and what nutrients might support. But then we can actually also get in there and take a sneak peek. And it's very cool. We live in a time that we can do that now with functional lab testing. And so that's that aspect. So that's what sort of grew this. I think of it as a parenting strategy of what I call parenting from the inside out or inside out parenting, of just like getting in there and like really understanding our kids from the inside so that we can create an environment for them. So that means understanding their biology, understanding their genetics, understanding their food reactions, understanding what nutrients they might need more of or less of, and also understanding their wiring, right? Their genetic wiring, how they are likely to respond to stress, mount a stress response based on how they use amino acids and transport and neurotransmitters. So that's what parenting from the inside out is understanding our kids from the inside so that we can create an environment around them that is conducive to what they need.
So I think, and that makes so much sense when I hear you say that. And it kind of like an analogy that I might throw out is that when our car breaks down, we don't go and think, oh, we need to clean the outside. We look under the hood, right? And that's essentially what you're talking about is we need to learn as parents if there's a outward problem, like a behavioral problem, our first step is often, maybe regular therapy or talk therapy or something like that, or medication, versus getting under that hood and really looking. And I think the sad truth is we're also, not everyone, but in this world, we're very disconnected from our bodies. And a lot of us wouldn't even know where to look. So how do you help parents even begin knowing where to look?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It fits really well. If our car stops working, we're not like, oh, our car doesn't work very well, or I have a defective car, or I have to, junk the car or whatever. Obviously, we wouldn't say that about our kids, but it's not the something's going on. Like let's bring it to the mechanic. And so I'm kind of akin to the mechanic when they come to me and they're like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Then I can usually boil it down to like, okay, well, then there's probably one of these 5 things going on, and I can, give you an assessment of what I think we should try, or we could run some diagnostics. It's not diagnostics in a medical sense of there's a diagnosis. So that needs to be clear. I don't diagnose anything. But functional lab work can give us that little window in and be like, oh, look, here's where we can support your body. We're having a food reaction. We can remove that food, and we can nourish the gut microbiome, and your child will feel better. So things like that.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
I'm really working towards a time when this is just a parenting strategy, and
Uh-huh.
I want this information to be put in the hands of parents so they can actually do it themselves, and they don't necessarily need outside help, because some of it is intuitive. I think one of the things that parents really need, they really need to tap into their intuition, because I'll tell you, like, the parents who come to work with me, they have strong intuition, and sometimes they just need confirmation, whether it's just from me telling them that, yeah, I think you're onto something because it's a pattern that I see in a lot of kids, or we run some testing and we're like, yeah, you were right. And maybe they need a little bit of guidance when it comes to the lab testing if they go that route.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot we can do without the testing as well. So I'm really big on supportive communities. Education is my roots, so I want to educate, help parents understand this information, because there really isn't a handbook for children, but I'm kind of working towards creating one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And making this information so widely known that it just becomes a cultural norm and another tool that is much more, widely used, right? I think that
Yeah.
sounds like that's what you're saying.
I think of it kind of as a new era of parenting, really, because our parents didn't really need to consider the gut microbiome or the processed foods or the sugar. And so I feel like with me and my cohort of parents raising kids, we have to think about different things than our parents had to think about: technology, right? Cell phones, sleep habits, like all of this stuff. So I do think of it as a bit of a, we're leading each other in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we don't have strong mentorship from our parents. Um, so on this stuff, on this inside out piece, and so that causes a lot of friction, actually, sometimes in families, because
Mm-hmm.
grandparents want to give the kids all kinds of sugar and all kinds of cupcakes and what have you, and then the parents
Always
are
a
running
treat.
these
Always
tests.
a treat.
Yeah,
Oh, they
always a
just need a
treat.
treat. I'm like, it's not a treat if it's every day.
Exactly. And or if the body's reacting to it, right? And we know we're going to
Mm-hmm.
have like 2 weeks of meltdowns afterwards. So this is this parenting from the inside piece that parents are getting really savvy to. Oh, well, this is what happens in my child's body when they have that sugar. And so that's very empowering. Now they have a reason. It's not just like, oh, you're being that parent who wants to deprive her kids of sugar.
So amidst all of the things that you've done, you wrote this wildly empowering book called Raising Resilience. And you also have this program, the Roadmap to Resilient Health. What is resilient health? Tell us about that.
So I have been working with resilience for decades, even before I knew of it as the word that I was that I was actually pursuing. But resilience essentially is flexibility in the face of stress, or you could even extend it to be growth in the face of stress. So a resilient person can get through a stressful experience, and not only get through it, but actually grow from it. So maybe it's sort of 2 steps of resilience. I want us at
Mm-hmm.
least to be able to get through stressful experiences without crashing, but then to actually be able to reflect on it and grow from it, understand your reactions and move through it and become a stronger person afterwards. So that's the essence of it.
Okay.
But from there, I keep thinking, I keep expanding it. Like, you can have immune resilience, which is you get sick and you feel crappy, but then you get better and now your immune system is stronger. You can have resilient thinking, which is something I've been thinking about lately. What's a resilient thinker? Somebody who is challenged and doesn't react, but can contemplate and can think and can grow and can consider, right? So there's different aspects of resilience, but that's the essence of it. So it's interesting in reflecting back, ever since I left university, like in my 20s, I got really interested in adventure therapy and in outdoor education and in taking people out into the woods and facilitating experiences with them so that they could build
Mm-hmm.
resilience. And then that took me into the classroom where I was doing the same thing. Then it was when I was in the classroom environment that I realized that kids were really struggling with building resilience. And I felt like I had really good tools to help them, but I had
Mm-hmm.
maxed out on my like social tools and pedagogical tools. And I wanted to understand the physiology. I wanted to understand what was going on in their bodies, which took me to where I am now.
I mean, you explained it beautifully. Because when I first read the name of the book, I didn't totally understand. Like, I wanted really understand resilience because it's a word that you hear a lot. We want to raise resilient kids, but what I think you've pulled the blanket back on is the idea that resilience is essentially like how we should be, right? We need to be able to thrive as humans in the face of stress. But because of this crazy culture we're living in for everything from nutrition to technology, it is really messing with our wires. And the kind of art or ability of resilience could essentially be lost on an entire generation if we don't connect the dots that you've essentially connected, which is you have to rewire so they can have a chance of being resilient, which is, I think, like the more zoomed out goal of how we want to be. We don't just want to be healthy, right? You could probably technically be healthy and still not be resilient.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's really big, but I've really tried to boil it down to a framework because it is so big, but it's actually
Mm-hmm.
not that complicated. So, in
Mm-hmm.
working with family after family after family, I've identified what I now call this raising resilience model. I have various names for it, but that's what its name is right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I've identified there's 5 things that kids need more of, and there's 5 things that get in their way. So if
Okay.
we explore those things, we will find the pieces that are getting in the way of their resilience, and we can
Okay.
address them. We can focus our attention. We can be really strategic. We feel empowered because we know exactly why we're doing what we're doing, and we can improve the resilience of our kids that way. That's my goal.
Like a roadmap. You've created a framework, a roadmap that parents can follow. So I have to ask, because everyone's, I'm sure, like, well, what are these 5 and 5 things? You said there's 5 things kids need and 5 things that get in their way. Are those things you could bullet
Yeah, for sure.
for
Let's
us
do
here?
it. And I'll create a little download for people if they want it.
Perfect.
So the things that kids need more of, I mean, it's not rocket science. It's just
Mm-hmm.
hard to implement. They need more real food than processed food, which is, exactly why we're here. They need real whole food. They need water, and they need clean air and clean water and sufficient amounts.
Mm-hmm.
They need movement. They need to move their bodies. They need connection with adults, caring adults, and
Mm-hmm.
connect. Their sense of connection depends on their age. It changes throughout lifespan, but they need connection and a sense of purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and they need restorative sleep. So there's nothing in that group that is going to be like, oh, I didn't know kids need that. It's just that we're putting it into a framework to be like, okay, when things are not going well, here's what you can take a look at. Here's where
Mm-hmm.
you start.
Yeah.
And 100% of the time when people come and work through our roadmap, there's something in there that needs some
Mm-hmm.
support. And so focusing on those 5 things is I this is what I call creating a culture of nourishment in your family. If you
Mm-hmm.
can create a culture of nourishment in your family, it means here in our family, we nourish ourselves. And here are 5 ways we can do that. What's going well? Where do we need to do some work? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where you start.
What I loved about what you said was they're essentially all things that are just getting us back to the basics we're running our engines and our energy so fast, and we pass that fast energy on to our kids. Like I'm always saying to Stella on school days, like we're on a fast train. We're on a fast train. We got to go. We're on a fast train. And finally, she's 4. She's like, Mommy, can we have a slow train today or a medium train? And my heart was like breaking. I'm like, you're 4. Yes, we can. Like what is really going on? And so I think I hone in on the food part of it. Let's get back to the basics of eating food that was grown on our earth food first. But you have the sleep, you have all the air, the movement. They're just basic things. We need to roll it back.
Absolutely. I love that she said that because, and a lot of kids can't articulate that, but it shows up as explosions in the classroom, or it shows up as school avoidance, or it shows up as tantrums, or it shows up as withdrawal. I don't want to talk to anyone. It's that too muchness. The train is too fast. I've got to get off. It's that. And so when that's happening, exactly what you said, dialing it back and be like, let's just focus on family dinners for a while, or let's focus on getting more sleep for a while. Or maybe it's the connection piece. It's often the connection piece. Like, kids are wired for attachment. Attachment parenting is at the core of everything that I do. And it understands that, like, we are the mentors for our kids. They need time with us. They need space. They need to just be in our presence and feel that we want to be with them.
So then you said there's 5 things that really tend to get in their way. I'm assuming some of those are the opposite of the 5 things they need, but do you want to just touch on those quickly?
Yeah, no, they're different. They're different. And here's what I tell people is that if you get to a point where you're like, I'm doing all of those things and my kid is still struggling, they're still not resilient. They don't have that resilient health or flexibility, whether that's mental or physical. Or you get to a point where you're like, I'm trying, but it's just not working. They won't drink the water. They won't sleep through the night. They won't move their bodies. Like, I understand, and I'm trying all these things, but it's just not working. So if you get to those points, either of those 2 points, then there's something else going on in the body. And this is where we look from the inside. And the 5 things that I've identified, again, patterns. I think that's one of my superpowers, is being able to see patterns and being able to connect dots. So I found these five things. So one of them is nutrient imbalances, right? They're missing certain nutrients, or they have too high or too low of certain nutrients. Food reactions, they're having a food reaction that you don't know about. Stuff going on in the gut. The gut-brain connection is a whole nother conversation we can have, but something's going on in the gut that's putting pressure on their nervous system. Infections and toxic load. They have a higher toxic load than their capacity to detoxify. So these 5 things I was seeing over and over again. It's not always all of them. Maybe it's 1 or 2, but sometimes it's a little bit of all of them. And what happens is, when these things are at play, they trigger a stress response in the body. They send messages to the nervous system that all is not well, and you need to do something about it, because that's the job of our nervous system. So if you're eating a food, and there's the physiology is more complicated. Sometimes it's going through the immune system or through the circulation system. But for parents, like, to understand, when your child is eating a food and they're having a reaction to it, for example, there is a message of threat and fear and worry going to the nervous system. And so the nervous system is going to respond. And so in the work that I'm really interested in, which is with anxiety and, kids who are having mood instability, that sort of thing, that is very significant, right? Because they're going to have a stress response.
Yeah.
And so the same thing with all of those things. If your child has an infection, if your child has got gut imbalances, microbes in the gut that are out of balance, same thing. Messages of threat and fear and worry. So what we want to do is we want to reverse the messages. We want to turn those messages of threat, fear, and worry into messages of calm, security, and safety. And so we do that by looking inside and see, okay, where are our leverage points? Where can we work? Where can we can we silence those messages or tone them down at least?
What is the nervous system really, like in layman's terms? So parents and listeners can really understand, what is it? Why is it so important that we keep it calm?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, the nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord and the peripheral nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have our autonomic nervous system, which is what governs our stress response. It's autonomic,
Mm-hmm.
it's automatic. We don't have conscious control over it. So we have a part of our nervous system that we have control over, and then we have a part of our nervous system that we don't have control over. It's really that part that we don't have control over that I am really interested in, because
Okay.
I think with kids, we tell them like, just snap out of it, or it's just okay, just take a breath, just, like that's their conscious nervous system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rationalizing, it's not that big a deal. But if their autonomic nervous system is saying, oh yeah, it's a big deal, then we're going to feel like we're hitting our head against a wall as their parents, being like, oh, you're overreacting again. It's really
Mm-hmm.
frustrating. So we have to work at that subconscious level, that autonomic level. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I shifted my thinking about 5 years ago now, because I used to think, oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's all about the gut. It's all about the gut, or it's all about the processed food, or it's not all about any one thing. If it's about any one thing, it's about the nervous system, right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
nervous system is the master orchestrator. It's the one. If the nervous system, our nervous system is our ally, it's there to protect us at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't like change, right? It doesn't like change. So it will sometimes protect us in ways that are not actually all that helpful,
Mm-hmm.
right? So back to the very beginning conversation that we had, where kids are reactive, that might be their nervous system just trying to protect them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they need more connection and they're not getting it. And so they hit the wall and they throw a tantrum because mom's on the phone and dad hasn't come home yet. And I'm hungry and I'm not getting what I want. And my brother just said something that I don't like. And so I throw a massive fit.
Mm-hmm.
That's a reaction. That's the autonomic nervous system saying, I'm having a stress response, right?
Right.
They don't know that, of course, right?
Yeah.
So in some, but it is their nervous system trying to protect themselves to get what they want
Mm-hmm.
or what they need. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And thank you for mentioning the two different, the conscious and subconscious, because I think also when we hear like you say the nervous system's having a stress response. I think when we hear the word stress, like, one of the things a lot of parents are like, they're kids, how stressed could they be? Because we think of stress as paying bills or, having to go to work. But you're talking about stress that if my child's eating gluten, and she has a sensitivity to it, not a full-blown allergy. She might not even be celiac, but it takes her autonomic nervous system, right, and puts it into a fight or flight mode instead of like a rest and digest, right? And that's the kind of stress you're talking about. Just to clarify for people, it's when your body goes into inflammation because of whether it's a food you're taking in, connection you're not getting, um, your body becomes inflamed, making it hard for you to have calm moods, etc.
Yeah, and inflammation is an important word to that, because all kinds of stress are going to cause inflammation, whether it's immune
Mm-hmm.
stress, it's psychological stress, it's lack of nutrient stress, like all of that stress will end up in inflammation. And it's that inflammation that is really putting pressure on the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's like pull apart the gluten piece. A gluten
Right.
reaction, I mean, there's celiac disease, there's non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and there's wheat allergy. There's 3 different types
Mm-hmm.
of reactions, but they all relate to the immune system responding
Right.
to a food. And the immune system, when it responds to a food, it's going to cause inflammation. That's the
Mm-hmm.
language of the immune system. Always will mount an immune response. And what we know now is that inflammation anywhere in the body can travel around the body and cause inflammation in other places. So that's
Right.
why when you eat a food, for example, you might have joint pain, or you might have neurological issues. You might get headache. You might not be able to sleep. You might
Mm-hmm.
have full-blown behavior problems and tantrums, which I have seen as well. It's the inflammation that is coming from the food, initiated in the gut, and then travels and puts that inflammation that travels around. And what I'm most interested is how it influences the nervous system, and it creates that message of fear and initiates a stress response.
Yeah. And I experienced this firsthand, and actually only after listening to your masterclass was I like, oh, I'm not crazy. I'm right. And it felt so good. I was like driving along. I'm like, oh, this is such good news, but not good news, but like very satisfying news. So again, she has the Hala on Fridays, and at this point we're still waiting to get her test back. So I'm like, okay, it's your body, your choice at this point, you know, how you feel. But I was like, I thought, I'm like, she acts crazy after she has the Hala, like she's had a whole chocolate cake, and it can last for a day or it can last for 2 days, and she's normally a very, I will say, calm, like not super moody child. But when she has that, and I was like, is there any way that just bread is causing it? There's, and I, now I'm like, yes, I think it is a direct correlation. I mean, I can't be sure until I get those tests back. But again, listening to my gut, I'm like, I think it is, causing that inflammation and making her act in a totally different way than she normally does.
Yeah, and because there's a bit of a I like to work at the headwaters. Like if you can find something at the headwaters and that's having a
Mm-hmm.
trickle down effect, you're more bang for your buck. And we're busy parents, so we need those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the inflammation caused by gluten in some people can cause the downstream effect of shifts in the microbiome,
Mm-hmm.
nutrient malabsorption, the inflammation we've already talked about. So there are blood sugar dysregulation.
Right.
So it might not be like, oh, it's the reaction to the wheat that's the problem.
Okay.
It might be the downstream effects that are happening because of that.
Got it.
Regardless, it's a symptom. It's telling you, it's a piece of information telling you that her
Mm-hmm.
resilience is not as strong as you want it to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in a perfect world, we should be able to eat a little bit and
Right.
not have that kind of downstream reaction, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when I see sort of that sort of thing, of course, we want to rule out celiac disease. We want to, make sure we want to run some. I don't like taking anything out of a kid's diet. It's maybe a bit of a controversial thing to say, but I don't like taking any gluten included out of people's diet if we don't have
Mm.
to. But if it's
Okay.
going to be a strong leverage point for us, then yeah, let's do it and let's
Mm-hmm.
see. So, but as we replete nutrients, as we stabilize blood sugar in other ways, as we take a look at the microbiome and make things a little bit more stable there, people can tolerate a little bit of what used to throw them over the edge.
Mm-hmm.
That's been my experience. Doesn't mean that gluten is like fine for everyone, and that's a whole can of worms to
Right.
open. But we're dealing with kids. And so
Mm-hmm.
in dealing with kids, we have to be very mindful of our language. We have to be very mindful of how we frame things. We don't want
Mm-hmm.
to, create problems around food.
Right.
And so I want us to be really strategic and have a really good reason and a really good understanding for why she can't have that on Fridays, because it's not without consequences to take that out, right? And
Yeah.
she does need the connection, and she does,
Right.
dealing with kids is different. If it was an adult, I would take a different approach possibly. But with kids, we
Mm-hmm.
have to be very mindful. We have to really mentor them.
Yeah. And that's such an important point, is when you do have to remove food. And I love that you take the approach that you'd rather not remove the food, but figure out why we need to remove the food. Like, is there something, can we heal her gut so she can have some gluten sometimes? And I love that approach versus the all or nothing, because I don't think that's healthy emotionally or sometimes even physiologically.
Yeah, and here's a little tidbit. One of the connections that I've seen, one of the patterns that I've seen is that zinc deficiency is really a big deal. And
Mm,
zinc is involved in every aspect of our digestion, including pulling
mm-hmm,
apart gluten. So sometimes, that's a place to start. I really like running zinc tests to see what's
mm-hmm,
going on there when we can. And because functional tests are not cheap, right? So if we can only run one or two, we want to make sure that we're getting good value. But
mm-hmm,
if there's a significant zinc deficiency, chances are pretty high that gluten's going to be a problem, because we need zinc in order to create hydrochloric acid in our stomach and create digestive enzymes, and it actually impacts how foods taste as well.
mm.
So that's a place to start. If we see a zinc deficiency, there's probably going to be issues with food and food sensitivities.
Oh, that is very interesting. And that actually perfect segue into my next question, which is I know you mentioned, I think in your book, that there's some common nutrient deficiencies that contribute to learning, behavior, growth, and immune struggles. Obviously, zinc, it sounds like, are one of them. Are there other deficiencies that people should look for, a handful, or that are most common?
B vitamins seem to be an issue uh, often, because
Mm-hmm.
they are very much involved in energy production and also in neurotransmitter production. So B6, I mean, we can't make GABA without B6, and GABA is our most abundant calming neurotransmitter. So when we're talking about turning messages of threat and fear into messages of calm and safety, we need GABA
Mm-hmm.
on board. So I like to take a look at whether there's sufficient B vitamins, but B6 and
Mm-hmm.
B12 and folate are they show up a lot. But even B1, I mean, B1 and B2 are involved in mitochondria function and in our capacity to create energy. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
what's going on is the kids they're running out of steam, right? Because we think of energy, it can feel counterintuitive because people are like, oh my gosh, my kid has so much energy. But we can think of energy like running around energy, but there's also cognitive energy, and our
Mm-hmm.
energy that it takes to focus and learn and think and remember. And sometimes kids are running out of that fuel, so they seem hyperactive, but then they crash and they can't focus and they can't listen and
Mm-hmm.
they can't learn. Um, so those are good to know. Copper is showing up as a problem area, and I'm still trying to figure out why this is becoming more and more of a problem.
A lack of copper or too much
Either a
copper?
lack of, or too much of, or not being able to use. Those seem
Mm.
to be the three issues. And what I'm seeing most in the demographic that I work with is not being able to use it. So it's
Hmm.
there, but it's not bound and usable. So that, and then it just causes all kinds of problems.
Hmm.
So it can look like a functional deficiency. So it's a piece. Copper will elevate when there's alongside estrogen, and so I'm suspicious. I don't have any concrete data on this, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
suspicious that maybe all the estrogenic compounds in our environment are leading to this elevation. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but copper will naturally increase in pregnancy, and then as our hormones shift and change, it should come back to normal. And
Mm-hmm.
the Walsh Research Institute found in 95% of their postpartum depression cases that high copper post
Wow.
pregnancy was a significant contributor to postpartum depression, because
Interesting.
some mamas were retaining that copper.
Huh.
It wasn't going back down. So yeah, I think the question then remains of like, why why is this happening? But that
Yeah.
it is a common pattern that I'm seeing. This combination of low zinc and high copper is a bit of a doozy, in terms of how we feel.
And then so you find out the zinc is very low. Are you replacing it usually with a supplement of zinc, depending on the child age, or food?
Well, both. It depends on the kid. It depends on the family
Mm-hmm.
dynamic. It also depends on genetics. So this is where I really like to run genetic tests. I love a food first approach, but sometimes with some
Mm-hmm.
kids, we have to work with some supplements before we can get the foods in.
Sure. So hearing all of this, I mean, like I said, Stella, actually, my daughter, actually, I don't think of her as a moody kid, but there's a couple things that I'm like, I want all these tests for her. Like, I want to work with you immediately. But I guess a question is, how do we know if our child's behavior is sort of, she's 4, she's a toddler, just normal growing pains? Sometimes she hits and bites us, but it's not all the time. Um, how do we know if it's normal or if something that needs more attention?
Yeah, that's such a good question because of course we're just comparing kids to kids, right? Or
Right.
kids to like
Yeah.
how I was when I was a kid or what have you. Um and you get to decide is the
Mhm.
reality. Like you get to decide is this okay or what does your gut tell you? What
Right.
does your instinct tell you? Do you want more information? Do you want more data? We can get that for you.
Mhm.
Do you just want to wait it out? You can do that too. You could look at
Mhm.
the five core nourishment needs that I went through, the 5 things that kids need more of. You can assess those and be like, oh, you know what? Actually, I think we could do some work there and you could focus there. So there's no one right answer um,
Mhm.
to the question. I think we do need to tap into our intuition. This is why I'm really big on like this cultural shift piece. Like if we're going to create a
Yeah.
culture of nourishment in our homes, is this something that we value? Like, talk about it with our kids, use the
Mhm.
model, like, just get curious. Curiosity is probably my favorite word. Right? Get
Mhm.
curious. Like, what are they? What are the patterns? Is she biting or hitting under certain circumstances? Can you figure out what those are?
So you're a mom to 3 boys, and you also have this vast knowledge of how nutrition can help your kids thrive. So what's been your approach to feeding your own family in this, very processed product kind of epidemic that we're living in today?
I'm not perfect. I mean, we've got some processed foods in our fridge right now.
Sure.
So I am not I've shifted over the years, to be honest. When my
Mhm.
kids were little, we were living in an off-grid house, in a homestead, in a home we had built ourselves. We were doing
Oh,
all
wow.
of the things. I was baking bread
Mhm.
every week. Like I was very into the homesteading aspect of
Okay.
raising kids until I couldn't do it anymore. And I felt isolated and I felt like we shouldn't be doing this by ourselves. We need community.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we actually ended up moving. It was massive. It was 2011, and I realized that, the dream was no longer the dream. And we actually moved to the city. It's crazy
Wow.
looking back on it. It was huge. Um, but that's what I needed for my own mental stability at the time. We've got money, time, and energy. Those are our
Mhm.
resources. Those are our bank accounts, so to speak,
Right.
and we have to play with that. And when one of them goes in the red, that's threat and fear, right? Like our nervous system feels that.
Mhm.
When all three are in the red, that's burnout, right?
Right.
And then we're like, you know, we have to climb out of that.
I want to talk about the current food culture that we're living in as we kind of try to raise healthy humans. One of the things that I personally like struggle with is like the picky eater label that has just become so rampant and popular in our zeitgeist. And I'm curious if you feel like picky eating is caused more by nature or more by nurture.
I think it's both. I think it's
Okay.
both. I think my approach to picky eating is to assume that it's nurture first because that's a
Mhm.
bit easier to deal with.
Mhm.
So constructing a very positive environment, minding your language around food, the idea of, my job is the Dr. Ellen Satter's idea of the division of labor of my job is to present good nourishing foods for you. Your job is to eat them. And there is a
Mhm.
division of labor there. So not force feeding, not bribing and all that stuff. So that's a place to start. Um, but very quickly, parents can fall into a few traps. One
Mhm.
is oh, they just won't eat it, so I won't give it to them trap,
Right.
right? Kids are learning. Kids are, if they didn't walk the first time, they don't say, "Oh, I'm not a walker." Right? They try again. They make
Mhm.
mistakes. Like mistakes happen. So if they don't eat the broccoli, continue to give them broccoli, and that can be really frustrating for parents. Food's really expensive and we don't want to always prepare it, but persistence pays off.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But then there's this whole nature piece, meaning something else might be going on. There are certain biological drivers of pickiness, and this is where the neurodivergence comes in too, because a lot of kids with neurodivergence also have this stuff going on in their body. So yeast overgrowth is a great example. Like a kid who has yeast overgrowth in their gut is going to crave
Mhm.
carbohydrates because it's the yeast that's craving the carbohydrates, right? If you've ever made
Right.
bread, you know that when you put sugar in with the yeast and the water, it starts to bubble. Um,
Mhm.
and so sugar feeds yeast. So it's going to be really hard to pull out the carbohydrates and the sugar from a kid who's very yeasty. That's what they're always going to want, and they'll say no
Mhm.
to everything else. So that's an
Hmm.
example, right? A kid who struggles with low blood sugar, same thing. They will reach for the carbs and the sugar because that's their body's instinct. It's the quickest way to get their blood sugar back up.
Mhm.
So there are aspects there when you feel like you've tried all of the things and uh they're just not responding, they're still not eating.
Mhm.
I'd say the next place I'd look is the gut and just see like what's going on in there and
Hmm.
why. There's nutrient deficiencies as well, like zinc. I already mentioned, like zinc deficiency is going to change how things taste. So
Right.
some kids who are like super tasters or just don't like the taste of anything, or they tell you there's sort of like a metallic-y taste in their mouth or things like that.
Mhm.
Or texture sensitivity also correlates with zinc deficiency. So there are some nutrient imbalances there as well. But like all behaviors, picky
Mhm.
eating, if we want to get to the root of it, we can look through those 5 core stressors and we'll find our answers. It's going to be in there
Right.
somewhere.
So with the kind of just again this process world that we're living in, what is your opinion on how do we reprogram our families to adopt what is really the old habit of eating more farm food than factory food? How do we begin that rewiring?
Depends where you are in your parenting journey, right? It's
Mhm.
much easier if your kids are younger. It's
Okay.
much easier if you and whoever your co-parent is, if you have one, are on the same page and both value this.
Mhm.
It's much easier when your extended family also values it as well, right? Or your
Yeah.
school or all of that stuff. So it
Mhm.
it does depend. I think, what I steer parents towards is creating that culture of nourishment in your home at whatever
Mhm.
age. If this is something that is important to you and it's resonating and you're sitting there going, yeah, 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 this totally makes sense, but it feels so far away, then the thing to do is to start just evaluating where you can start. For a lot of
Okay.
parents, it's buying a water bottle and an air and a water purifier and just focusing on hydration,
Mhm.
or getting a handle on bedtime. For some families, it's like focus on yourself. Like, are you valuing this in your body?
Mhm.
Because your kids don't want to have anything to do with it. So you be the model, you do the thing. As you do that, you're going to see how it makes you feel, and that's going to help you transmit this information to the kids, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
it really depends, but I think the one thing that we have control over is the culture within our family. It's
Mm-hmm.
becoming more and more difficult, right? When, tech comes in, social media comes in, school pressures come in, and all the outside world comes in, and we're like, protect the family. It's
Yeah.
becoming harder, but if you know why you're doing something and you have a model to follow,
Mm-hmm.
it gets easier.
But I like what you said. You have to just pick one thing and start, right? Educate yourself, and then when you can, when you have the bandwidth, start something, right? Um, so we have a segment that I call the unpopular opinion segment. And so I'm going to ask you, what is one opinion that you stand by that tends to fall into the unpopular category?
I try not to care. So I don't know if it's unpopular or not.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I would say something that I do think is a bit different is I want to nourish before we restrict with kids. I think there are a lot of nutritionists who are like, take out the sugar, take out the additives, take out the gluten, take out the dairy, or I won't work with you, or, or you're never going to see results. And I think with kids, that approach doesn't help. It doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily work. So I want to nourish them before we consider taking anything out. Unless, of course, we know that it's an allergy. We know that it
Right.
has to come out, with that exception. But I want to bring things in, and it's not just food. It's all
Mm-hmm.
aspects of nourishment.
Right. And that goes back to that real holistic health, and holistic nutrition is not just food, right? It's the connection, it's the sleep, it's all those other pieces of our wheel of
Yeah,
life.
it's understanding what the human body needs and what a child's body
Mm-hmm.
needs, and bringing in
Right.
more of that.
Yeah. All right. If you could wave a magic wand, what one thing would you create or change immediately to help more children find consistent, calm, and resilient health?
Mom guilt.
That's
I would wipe it
interesting.
off the face of the planet. It's
I love
so
that one.
I know it's maybe not what you were expecting, but it's so unhelpful, and it is our default. And I fall into it as well. I'm by no means perfect. But in order to
Yeah.
raise resilient kids, we have to improve our own resilience and our own confidence, and connect with our own intuition, and do our own thing, even though everyone's rolling their eyes at us.